my soul and have sorrow in my heart all day long. How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep the sleep of death. And my enemy will say, I have prevailed. My foes will rejoice because I am shaken. But I trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountiful with me. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
For a couple of weeks now, we've been hearing what sound like the last of Jesus' last-minute directives to his disciples as they head out the door for parts unknown to put into practice all that they have learned from him. His words have sounded kind of parental to me. This might be the last time I have a chance to impart some of my wisdom in this teachable moment, so I better tell them one more thing before they leave. So, the last couple weeks we have heard Jesus give his disciples practical instructions on how to conduct their mission. Share the good news by what you say and do, proclaim it, heal the sick, cast out demons, cleanse those who are considered unclean. Let folks know that the reign of God is drawing near. Take nothing with you so that you might trust fully in God and receive from strangers the kindness they might offer. He has schooled them on how to deal with a less than enthusiastic reception, saying basically, if you're not welcome, leave. He's gotten real with them about rejection and suffering, saying strongly to them, folks are going to malign you and mistreat you. Get used to it. He's reminded them of the risky nature of their mission, telling them that they will be in situations and with people who are worth fearing, but that they don't need to fear, because it is God who has given them purpose and power, and a God who will be with them. And he's encouraged them to be prepared for the divisions that they will experience in their own families and their own communities as a result of their obedience to him. And so I picture Jesus right now. The disciples are out the door. Jesus is sticking his head out the window as they're walking down the driveway. And with some sense of urgency, he says these very last words to him. Matthew 10, verses 40 through 42. Whoever welcomes you welcomes me, he says, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. Whoever welcomes a prophet in the name of a prophet will receive a prophet's reward, and whoever welcomes a righteous person in the name of a righteous person will receive the reward of the righteous. And whoever gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones in the name of a disciple, truly I tell you, none of these will lose their reward. And then they're gone, out of hollering range, Jesus' last words echoing in their ears. So what is this important thing that he wants to leave ringing in their ears as they hit the road? Well, what he wants them to know of their journey and purpose, what he wants them to recall in the most challenging moments of their ministry when they might be questioning the wisdom of their mission, is that he is sending them out in his name to enact and to embody the hospitality of the kingdom of God in the world. To enact and embody the hospitality of the kingdom of God in the world. Seems like a pretty tall order for 12 disciples, doesn't it? In theory, the disciples already know how to do hospitality because they have been on the receiving end of that throughout their journey with Jesus. He's invited them to follow him. He's welcomed them into community, provided food and drink, introduced them to others, made them feel like family. And the imperative to extend hospitality began long before Jesus, frankly. It is deeply embedded in the Torah, and part of the measure of the Hebrew community's faithfulness to God is the call to welcome strangers. It ought to have been part of the disciples' spiritual DNA. The ancient practice of hospitality was crucial to the survival of humanity. 2 weeks ago, as part of our service, I read a text from Genesis. You might remember Abraham and Sarah were sitting around, and 3 strangers came to their yard. And sort of the ideal vision of what hospitality looks like. They dropped everything to tend to the travelers' needs. Abraham ran to greet them, washed their feet, offered them the shadiest spot in the lawn, told people to bake them bread, and slaughtered the best calf for their meal. See, when travelers passed through, travelers who were almost always total strangers, it was incumbent upon the household to feed them, to make them feel at home, to make them feel like family. And while Abraham's response of devoting every possible resource to the comfort of the 3 strangers sounds wildly extravagant, Jesus tells the 12, just even a cup of water is good. It will be rewarded. And it sounds really easy, doesn't it? A cup of cold water. Although you might want to ponder for a moment the challenges of providing a cup of cold water in the desert with no refrigeration or ice machine in the tent. A cup of cold water would have entailed a long walk to a deep well and then frequent returns on a long walk to the deep well for more cold water. But even with the effort to fetch it, how does giving somebody a cold cup of water enact and embody the hospitality of the kingdom of God in the world? Because it seems like such a small thing. Oh, the beauty and blessing of small things. A cup of cold water. Eye contact. A smile. Moving over in your seat to signal an invitation to somebody else to sit next to you. Gestures that anybody could miss if they weren't paying attention. But Jesus said, even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones. That designation referred not only to children, but to those considered vulnerable, inferior, less than. Those without homes and families, immigrants, aliens, as they're called in the Bible, the sick and the dying, widows, those who were possessed and in deep distress. A cup of water, any small gesture of welcome to a person who was on the margins, was not so small a gesture to him or her. It is a gift of compassion, no matter how small it might seem to us. And believe me, when you are doing something, anything in the name of Christ, people pay attention, even to the small things. At the end of my first week of clinical pastoral education, CPE, that chaplaincy training thing I have talked about before, our supervisor uttered some of the most intimidating words I had ever heard up to that point. She said kind of casually, God shows up when the chaplain walks in. And at that moment, walking out the door seemed like a really good idea. But over those 12 months, and then several years into it, as I visited patients and responded to crises, I began to understand there was real truth in that. Because to them, I wasn't a representative of a church or a denomination. Most didn't know and did not care about my education or my ordination or that I was Presbyterian or that I was even Christian. I represented God, for better or for worse. And because of that, some people rejected me outright because they did not believe in God, or they did not trust God, or they were angry at God, or a whole host of other reasons. And a few were ambivalent toward me, and maybe toward God too. But I will tell you that the overwhelming majority of folks wanted me there in the room with them, and mostly not for profound theological conversations. And not because I could save their life or the life of their loved one or change the outcome of the diagnosis they had just heard or ensure the success of the surgery they were waiting for. They wanted me there to hold their hands. They wanted me there to say a prayer. They wanted me there to listen to their story. They wanted me there to look at pictures of their family members who lived so far away they couldn't be there, and they worried they might not see them again. They wanted me to be there so they wouldn't die alone. They wanted me to sit vigil with their mother or their father or their daughter or their son or their husband or their wife as they waited for him or her to die. They needed me there to keep it more or less together so they could fall apart. They needed me to be there to give them permission without shushing them or looking away or becoming anxious so they could weep and wail and grieve. And sometimes they needed me to be there to tell them the hard truth that they couldn't hear from anyone else. And you know, compared to what everybody else in the hospital did, my ministry was small indeed. But if God shows up when the chaplain walks in, then I had to do what God would do. And the God I believe in, the God of the scriptures, the God of our Christian tradition, the God we worship in Jesus Christ, well, that God shows up. That God makes room for people and whatever they are experiencing. That God comes alongside us to be with us and among us and in us in the celebrations and sorrows and struggles of our existence. Rather than taking cover in the cloak of divinity, God in Jesus models vulnerability. God in Christ is present deep in the muck of human suffering, a healing presence to every broken body and spirit. And God, the God I love and serve, moves over and makes room for everybody who wants to sit down and rest. See, hospitality is the central quality of the God that we worship and serve. Friends, we are in the ministry of small things. As much as I would like for the church to eliminate from this community and this state and this nation and this world the problems of hunger and violence, of injustice and oppression, of racism and sexism, of hatred and fear, I'm not counting on it. But we do have every opportunity to be Christ to our neighbors and strangers one at a time. We have every encouragement from Jesus to see Christ in our neighbors and strangers one at a time, and to treat them as such. With a cup of cold water on a hot day, or a bag of groceries, or a warm conversation, or a seat in the pew, or a place at the table. I don't know how the church, that's capital C church, not this particular church, I don't know what happened for the church to move so far away from being a place of welcome to being perceived by many as sitting in a place of judgment, an institution more vested in gatekeeping than door opening. But I grieve that perception. And I think it's all the more reason that we have to be intentional and deliberate and persistent in our hospitality. In her book, Amazing Grace, Kathleen Norris tells the story of a nun who, although she has Alzheimer's, still asks to be rolled in her wheelchair to the door of the nursing home so that she can greet every guest who enters. Said one nun of her sister in the ministry of small things, she's no longer certain what she's welcoming people to, but hospitality is so deeply ingrained in her that it has become her whole life. God, if people would say that about us. The ministry of small things means to genuinely, warmly welcome people, those who come into this place and those we meet while we make our way in the world as Jesus people. Hospitality to folks who enter this place isn't the job solely of the pastor and the greeters. It is your job too. With the people you saw here last week and those who've been gone for a while, and with people who look vaguely familiar from the community and those you would be tempted to avoid on the sidewalk in the middle of the afternoon. Because hospitality is a part of our spiritual DNA. And if every human being cannot feel welcome here, then where in God's name can they be greeted as the beloved children of God they are? We have a holy purpose, a divine mission, even if it's the smallest of things, like offering somebody a cup of cold water on a hot day. Amen.